Rosicrucian and Christianity Lectures by Max Heindel. Narrated by Matthew Schmitz. Lecture 10. Astrology, Its Scope and Limitations. In modern times, the science of astrology has come to be regarded as an exploded fallacy, and, like the clairvoyant, the astrologer is looked upon as a charlatan, and not without reason, for such advertisements as are found in almost any paper offering to cast a horoscope, telling one's fortune from the cradle to the grave for the magnificent sum of 10 cents, or even for a postage stamp, are enough to give a certain justification for the appellation fakir, and this lecture is given to show another side, not popularly known, to this ancient and misjudged science, to show its uses and its limitations. There are two kinds of astrology and two kinds of astrologers: those who do not even cast a horoscope for their patrons, but only ask the month of birth, which information tells them what sign the sun was in at the time of the person's birth. Then they copy from a book or have a set of 12 mimeographed forms telling the person's fortune. It is evident to any reasoning mind that there are more than 12 classes of people in the world, and according to that method there would be a similarity of line if the case of every 12th person, whereas we know that no two persons have the same experience, that every life is different from all others, and any method that does not make such a difference must be false upon the face of it. The 10-cent astrologer is a good businessman. His mimeographed reading, stationery, and postage do not cost more than 2 cents, so he has a profit of 8 cents for every horoscope. Commercially, that is an enormous profit, but it fades into insignificance before the fact that every time the astrologer gets an order, he gets the name of a fool, and he has a regular follow-up system whereby he notifies his customers from time to time that certain very important developments are due to take place in a near future, which he will reveal for $1. He will work his victims systematically, until at last experience has taught him how worthless are the prognostications he receives, and then such people cry down astrology as fraud or folly. The scientific method demands first month, day, and year from the applicant because it takes into consideration all of the 9 heavenly bodies in the solar system, and it knows that they have at that time a certain relative position to one another. That same position will not occur again until a sidereal year has passed, and that is 25,868 of our ordinary years in length, so that if a child is born today, it would take 25,868 years before another child could be born with the same horoscope. But even that is not enough, for it is estimated that a child is born every second. That would give 86,400 whose experience in life would be alike if only the day of birth were taken into consideration. Therefore, the scientific astrologer demands both the hour and place or birth in addition to the day, month, and year, for there are seldom 2 people born in the same place at the same hour and minute. Even twins come from 20 minutes to a number of hours apart, and that makes a great difference. Where they are born from the same sack and alike, they will have been born when the same zodiacal sign was rising in the east, for that is an important factor in giving form to the body. But where they are born from separate envelopes and dissimilar, calculation will bring out the fact that the end of one sign was rising at the birth of one, and the beginning of the next when the second one was delivered, or when there are several hours between. There may be more signs between, for as the earth turns on its axis through the day, a new sign rises every 2 hours at the equator, but nearer the pole, some signs are passed quicker on account of the inclination of the earth's axis, so that at times there may be several signs between the birth of twins, which would make their lives very different. When, however, it happens that 2 children are born in the same place at the same time, there is also a marked similarity in their lives. There are such cases on record. One instance will suffice. A Mr. Samuel Hemmings was born in the same parish in London at the same hour and near the same minute as King George III, June 4th, 1738. He went into business as an ironmonger on the same day the king was crowned. He was married the same day as His Majesty, died on the same day, and also other events in the 2 lives resembled each other. The difference in station precluded both being kings, but on the same day when one became the monarch of a kingdom, the other also became an independent businessman. Astronomy stands in about the same relation to astrology as anatomy to physiology. Anatomy gives the dry facts as to the location and the structure of the constituent organs of the body, and astronomy gives like dry data with regard to the heavenly bodies. But as it is reserved for physiology to enunciate the utility of the different organic parts of the body, which alone makes such knowledge of value, so it is the part of astrology to explain the significance of the changing relative positions of the heavenly bodies in regard to the actions of mankind. It will need no argument to prove that the chemical condition of the Earth's atmosphere is different in the morning from what it is at noon or evening. We also see the changes produced in different seasons, and we recognize that these changes are due to the sun's changed position. We also recognize the effect of the moon on the tides, etc. These bodies move fast, yet are constantly producing changes in the atmospheric conditions of the Earth, and in these days of wireless telegraphy, it should not be hard to conceive that the other heavenly bodies also produce an effect. As we have already seen, these changes are so numerous that the same chemical condition could not occur except at intervals of 25,868 years. Thus we see that the electrostatic condition of the atmosphere at the moment a child draws its first breath would give to each atom of the little sensitive body an individual stamp. It is as if we were charging a new electric battery, and any change in the atmospheric condition will affect that brain differently from all others, for its original stamp varied from all others. There is in the mind of many people the idea that astrology is fatalistic, and while it may so appear, a deeper study will show that this idea is erroneous, that as all our sorrows and pains are the result of ignorance, so knowledge will avert misfortune, if applied, in time. And in order to understand the scope of our free will, we must recognize the fact that the result of our past deeds goes through a threefold process of ripening. In the first place, there are causes which have allowed to run their course unchecked by other acts, and so have nearly worked themselves into effects that they are like the ball shot from a pistol. They are beyond our power of interference and must be allowed to run their course for good or ill. They are called ripe causation in occultism, and they are clearly shown in the horoscope when properly cast. Of course, it would do us no good in one sense to know when we cannot avert them, but sometimes we may alter the conditions under which such a ripe cause spends itself, and then there is hope. We see the passing cloud. We know when it will have spent its fury, and that gives us a hope we should not have, save for the prognostications of astrology. The second kind of causes is that generated and worked out from day to day, a sort of pay-as-you-go transaction. This kind may often be avoided or rectified by a knowledge of astrology. The tendencies are also shown in the horoscope. The third kind of causes is that which we are making, but which we cannot work out now. That is saved up for adjustment in later years or later lives. In regard to this class, we have absolute freedom. The horoscope will aid us by showing the tendencies so that we may be particularly careful at critical times, working with all our might to catch the good opportunities and taking extra pains to avoid an evil tendency. To illustrate the working of the law of consequence in relation to prediction, we may cite some cases within our own experience. Mr. L., a well-known and popular lecturer, had never studied astrology, but was interested and was offered tuition. In order to lend interest to the study, his own horoscope was used as a basis of instruction, and he would thus be able to check the interpretations of the past and thus arrive at a better understanding than if someone else's nativity had been used. In the course of the calculations, it came out that Mr. L. was subject to frequent accidents. Previous accidents and happenings were figured out to the very day they happened, which impressed Mr. L. very much. It was further seen that on the 21st of July, 1906, another accident was due and would affect the upper part of the chest, arms, and neck to the lower part of the head. Also, that it would result from a short journey. Mr. L. was warned that as the new moon, occurring on that day, was the factor in bringing about the event, he must stay in the house on that day, and also on the 7th day after, the latter being even more dangerous than the original. He was much impressed and promised to obey the injunction carefully. Just previous to the critical time, we wrote Mr. L. from Seattle to ensure remembrance of directions and received a letter in reply that he was mindful and would be careful. The next communication was from a mutual friend, stating that on the critical day, July 28th, Mr. L had gone to Sierra Madre in an electric car and at a railway crossing had come in collision with a train, was hurled out through a window, and sustained injuries in the places mentioned in the prediction, also a lesion to a tendon which had not been seen. It was a sore puzzle, of course, to know why Mr. L had disregarded the injunction, as he was very much impressed with the reality of the danger. The answer came 3 months later when he was able to write himself. He said, "I thought the 28th was the 29th. This was plainly a case of ripe causation that could not be avoided. In other cases, people have been warned of accidents, have followed instructions and escape, and said afterwards, 'But do you really think I would have been hurt if I had not done so?' That is the difficulty. People do not believe unless they get it knocked into them, as Mr. L did." He wrote, "These accidents have deepened my respect for astrology immensely. But is that the only way we can learn? If so, the more the pity for us. It is a true saying that no man liveth to himself. We all affect each other. That also is shown in the horoscope. The death of the parents is particularly shown in each one's horoscope, for they are the source of the body in which we live, and often, where the birth hour is unknown, the proficient astrologer can find it from the great events in life, particularly if the father's and mother's death day is given him. Husband and wife are also so tied that the great events in the life of one are shown in the horoscope of the other. A case in point came under notice a few years ago when a Mrs. F. was warned of a danger of rupture of relations between herself and Mr. F. She was told that an anticipated journey would be stopped and social functions suspended. They were society people. The lady acknowledged having contemplated a journey to Europe, but pooh-poohed the idea of giving it up and asked if Mr. F. was in danger of death. The answer was, worse. But as it was a delicate matter, and she a stranger, no more could be said, save that November would be a time of disaster. The 14th of that month, her husband was sentenced to 5 years in the penitentiary for criminal assault on a little girl. The journey was, of course, suspended, and social ostracism followed. This case shows particularly the delicate position of the astrologer. Though he may see and is desirous of helping, conventions debar him from saying outright what he sees. The before-mentioned case in point. Though anxious to avert suffering, it was impossible to warn. Therefore, we advocate the study of astrology by all. Not even the best astrologer, who is a stranger, can see into the lives of those near and dear to us, as we can when we have studied astrology, because of the insight we have already gained into their characters. Conventions do not hinder us to the same extent as they affect a stranger. Besides, a bought horoscope can never engender in us the sympathy for others which comes from the personal knowledge of astrology. When a visitor to Columbus, Ohio, the writer was shown the horoscope of a certain boy cast by his aunt. It was seen at once that the boy was going through a crisis which would last about 6 years. During that time, an enormous amount of evil would surely come to the surface, and all would depend upon what his treatment at home would be. And oh, the pity of it, ignorance of the hidden causes governed the attitude of the parents. Instead of forbearance, love, and sympathy, he was getting lectures and punishments. Regarded as a scapegrace, how could he be expected to be good at that age? A great wave of sympathy swept over the writer at the realization of what that poor boy must suffer, and when a horoscope of the lad's younger sister revealed the fact that when about 14 she would enter upon a similar crisis, the need was felt of sending an urgent message to those parents, telling them for pity's sake to lavish love on that child in the few years which would elapse ere the commencement of the crisis, to make home so dear and homelike to her that when the crisis comes, she will have so much love and cheer at home that all other companionships and all other places must seem dull by comparison. Only in that way will it be possible to save that child, and it has been a frequent prayer with the writer that the advice may be heeded. We have those mysteries, the children, all around and amongst us. Upon the way we solve the riddle will it depend what we reap as a result of our guardianship. It is not beyond the average intellect to be able to cast an ordinary horoscope and read it for character. Character is destiny, and if we know the character of a growing child, we may lay up for ourselves great treasure in heaven by strengthening the good tendencies and helping it by example and precept to weed out the evil. One of the greatest uses of astrology, in the writer's opinion, is determining the character of children and bringing them up so as to strengthen their weak points and stem the evil tendencies. In character reading, astrology is correctly interpreted in 99% of the cases by most experienced astrologers, and no parent can benefit and help a child more than by getting a horoscope for it, except by learning to case it. In the meantime, a friend who understands astrology may be utilized to furnish a horoscope for the child. While astrology is an absolutely true science, it must always be taken into consideration that the astrologer is but human and therefore fallible. Though a conscientious astrologer with the ability to combine and blend the stellar influences will generally give correct forecasts, he is ever liable to meet his Waterloo, often where he least expects it. The writer has only once said that a prediction he made would not fail, and that time it did fail. There was an escape clause, and it was seen, but the aspects were so strong that it seemed impossible that the predicted event could fail to materialize. It nearly happened, but was frustrated at the critical moment, showing the potency of the escape clause. That predictions fail at times is due to a factor which the astrologer cannot take into consideration: the free will of man. So long as people drift aimlessly with the time and tide of life, wafted hither and thither by the wind of circumstance, the task of prediction is easy, and the careful and competent astrologer can predict accurately for the great majority of people, for the horoscope shows their tendencies, and apart from individual effort, mankind follows these tendencies unresistingly. But the more evolved the man, the more liable is the astrologer to fail, for he can only see the tendencies. The will of the man as a factor, it is beyond him to calculate. In the nature of things, there must be this element of uncertainty. If conditions were so hard and fast that no mistake were possible, it would show that inexorable fate governed human life, and there would be no use in making an effort to change conditions. But the very fact that predictions do fail is an inspiration, for it shows that a certain amount of free will does exist. There is one phase of prediction where astrology is perhaps infallible and of great use. That is in determining the affinity of people, so that instead of making marriage a lottery or chance, it can be ascertained beforehand what amount of happiness or sorrow will result from such a union. There would certainly be no need for divorce in cases where a fairly competent astrologer had recommended the union. In the previous lectures, we have seen that human life is governed by a great law of nature, the law of consequence or causation, that our every act is causative and will bring its inevitable effect as surely as the pebble thrown into the air returns to earth. Under this great law we meet again both friends and foes, and it seems that it is impossible to come into the closest of all relations, marriage, with a stranger. Therefore it appears that the influences which thus incite people are ripe causation, which cannot be avoided. The writer has noticed that when people ask for an astrological forecast of a proposed marriage, and predictions are favorable, they invariably hurry the ceremony because it is in line with their wishes. But where the astrologer is compelled to predict disaster, they invariably conclude that he does not know as much as he thinks he does, and they either get married anyway or consult someone who predicts as they wish, and then follow his advice. The greatest of all uses of astrology is in dealing with sick people, and that is the only use the writer makes of it now. We have spoken of the law of consequence, which brings to each at the appointed time the results of his past actions, whether in this or other lives. The stars are the clock of destiny, as it were. The 12 signs of the zodiac correspond to the face of the clock with its 12 figures. The sun and the planets with their slow motions indicate the year when any certain event is due, and the swift-moving moon will tell us the month. There is one class of people who are particularly under the influence of Luna, the moon. Lunatics, we call them on that account. In their lives, the changes of the moon are particularly felt, and the astrologer can forecast not only to the day, but even to the very hour when rises manifest. A case in point from the writer's experience will illustrate. The wife of a friend became mentally ill and was put under the care of 2 nurses. Warning was given concerning crises at different periods, and the precautions taken prevented serious trouble. The lady's husband always made it a point to be on hand and to help the nurses, and a straitjacket was used. One such night a warning had been given for 2 a.m. The gentleman was there as usual in the room with the patient. He lay on the bed fully dressed, and the lady was sitting up in bed during the forepart of the night, talking, mostly rationally, and pleaded to have the wristbands of the straitjacket untied. And she seemed so rational, the husband complied, and a little later the lady herself unfastened the straps imprisoning her lower limbs. About 2 a.m. she arose and searched the room for something, still speaking quietly and rationally, but Mr. got the idea that she was hunting for a knife, so he also arose to watch her, but as he did so she sprang at him, biting his cheek, and a knife fell to the floor. It took the combined efforts of the husband and nurses to get her back into the straitjacket. A few days later, Mr. discovered that his trousers had been pierced in 2 places by a glancing blow from the knife. The attack occurred at the very hour predicted. When sickness comes to anyone, the crisis is shown by the horoscope, and from that it is possible to see the developments in the case, so as to be able to take advantage of the propitious times. Then the healing remedies will have so much greater effect, and if the healer is unable to make much progress on account of adverse planetary conditions, he can at least hold out hope and say when a change will occur. Such a case happened in Duluth, when the writer was asked to attend a lady suffering from blood poison. She had been given up by the doctors. On casting her horoscope, it was seen that she had had a similar disease 7 years before, and that another crisis was due in a few days, when the new moon would aggravate the condition. The lady was in great agony with her relatives around her. She was taking leave of them and expected to die. As the moon was dark, it did not hinder much, and in about 20 minutes the patient was resting easy and without pain. In 2 days the poison had been driven from the abdomen down to the knees. But then the new moon stopped progress, and the 3rd day itching and pain in the lower part of the limbs commenced again. We fought it for 3 days, but, while able to stop the pain during treatments, it commenced an hour or 2 after. The swelling remained as before. It was then plain that no relief was possible till the moon had turned the full. The patient was told that no relief was possible at once, but on a designated day the swelling would yield to the treatments already given and the pain cease. On the day designated, the lady got up in the morning and could put her shoes on with ease. The sickness was past. In this relation, a physician and surgeon in Portland, Oregon, said that his experience had led him to always perform his operations, if at all possible, while the moon is increasing, as he had noticed that there was greater vitality at that time, and wounds healed better than when the operation was performed while the moon was decreasing. To the occultist, the 12 signs of the zodiac are the visible vehicles of the 12 great creative hierarchies which helped man to evolve up to his present stage of self-consciousness, the sun being the vesture of the highest spiritual intelligence manifest in our system at the present time. The 7 planets, Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Earth, Venus, Mercury, and the bodies of the 7 great star angels, of whom we hear in all religions as the 7 spirits before the throne, the 7 archangels of the Mohammedans, the 7 rishis of the Hindus, the 7 Amshaspins of the Parsis, etc. They act according to the law of consequence and are the ministers of our Lord, the Sun God, each taking care of a definite part of God's will. From them, as spirits, we have all come in 7 rays, and one of them is thus our father star, and remains so throughout all our lives. The fact does not preclude that we may be and are born at different times under all the other stars, so as to gather varied experience, and our horoscope will show what particular star is our ruler in this life, but we never know our father star until at the last initiation. From this fact comes also the beautiful doctrine of twin souls, not to be confounded with the coarse and bestial teaching which has been made the excuse for abominable adulterous practices. But all who have emanated from the same father star are brother, sister, or twin souls in all their lives on earth, and no one can enter an occult school except the one composed of our brothers, from the same ray or star angel from which we have emanated. This was what Christ Jesus meant when he said to the disciples, "Your Father and my Father," whereby we may understand that Jesus and his disciples were twin souls emanated from the same ray. To the Pharisees, he ascribes a different origin, calling them children of the devil, Saturn, or Satan. Yet it must not be supposed that Saturn is evil. He has his beneficent mission to fulfill, like all the other of God's ministers. He is the subduing influence which brings sorrow to put a damper upon our arrogance, the tempter to bring out our imperfections that we may be purged of evil and become perfect and virtuous. And his virtues are grand and great, chastity and justice, a rectitude that will never swerve, but it lacks mercy and love. That comes from the beautiful Venus. From her also comes music and art, which serve to turn us to the higher side of nature. Jupiter is the beacon that lures us on to heaven and inspires us with lofty thoughts of devotion to God and altruistic aspirations. Mars is the energizer, spurring us on to work in the vineyard of life. Were it not for his prodding influence, there would be no vim or vigor in man. In his evil aspects, he gives us passion, war, and strife, but that is because we misuse the energy he imparts. In the same way, Venus will give sloth, and Jupiter indolence. But when we allow their good influences to be misdirected by our lower natures, Saturn comes and puts us through the trials of sorrow and tribulation to bring us again to the path of advancement and purity. Mercury, the messenger of the gods, is the fount of wisdom, whence the human mind gets its tone, the smallest of all the planets, but the kingdom of the star angel who has the most important mission of all in respect to our human race. Upon its positions and configurations in the horoscope will depend whether the coming life will be one of devotion to the higher self, or if the lower nature will hold sway, for the mind is the link between the higher self and the lower nature. If it is so posited that it cares more for the pleasures of sense than the joys of the soul, sorrowful will be the end. Yet it should always be remembered that no man is compelled to do evil, and that the greater the temptation, the greater the reward to him that overcometh the tendencies shown in the horoscope. For let it always be remembered that though the stars impel, they cannot and do not compel. In the final analysis, we are the arbiters of our destiny, and despite all the evil influences, it is within our power to rule our stars by the exercise of will, the badge of our divinity to which all else must bow. As Ella Wheeler Wilcox has said so poignantly, one ship sails east, and another sails west, with the self-same winds that blow. 'Tis the set of the sail and not of the gale, which determines the way they go. As the winds of the sea are the ways of fate, as we voyage along through life, 'tis the act of the soul that determines the goal, and not the calm or the strife.